Welcome to the Virtual Proposal Development Center at Jackson State University. This module will examine challenges and best practices in collaborative proposal writing. Most of the topics that we will cover should help you in your collaborative writing projects, both those that you do on your campus, face-to-face meetings, and those that you do virtually. Our objectives in this module are to recognize these challenges and to try to overcome them with best practices. Although sometimes we have to acknowledge the challenges and just work around them. We can't always overcome them. And then we'll also talk about some of the tools that are available to facilitate collaboration. In a separate PowerPoint, we go through the detailed advice on the collaborative writing process, and those are simply ideas to help you kind of prepare for the next stage of your collaborative work. As academics, we are very much aware that our institutions and our individual disciplines tend to reward individual effort more than collaborative effort. Even as we are being pushed to take part in interdisciplinary studies and teaching, quite often when it comes down to our evaluations, we are evaluated on individually produced products. So most of us don't have a great deal of experience working collaboratively on large projects. In addition to that challenge, we also face the difficulty of our jargon and our values being slightly different from one discipline to the next. And quite often when groups get together that are interdisciplinary, it takes a little while to define what is considered the norm for that particular group. And there has to be, part of the process has to be discussion of what's going to be valued by that group. And another challenge sort of related to the need to find some common values is that we often don't plan enough time. Because with solo work, you are defining and setting goals on your own. You don't have to set aside time for those discussions. Collaborative writing involves a lot more talking about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Also, with collaborative projects, there is kind of some jockeying for position. Sometimes you have one individual who wants to control the process, and that can be okay as long as everyone agrees to that organizational structure from the beginning. Another challenge that I see with collaborative writing, with group writing, is that many times the group will begin by separating the writing into individual pieces and go off and do their own solo writing and then come back together and try to just jam the pieces together in a way that doesn't make a coherent whole and makes it very difficult for the reviewers of these grant proposals to get a sense of what the group is trying to accomplish. So we'll talk about how to avoid that particular trap in a bit. And then there's also sometimes a difficulty aligning the goals of the project and the individual tasks. And that again can be, that problem can be ameliorated with some good planning at the beginning and regular discussion with the group. I included this cartoon from the from Peanuts. You have Lucy and Linus and Charlie Brown, and they're looking at clouds, and Lucy and Linus both see some very complex patterns and ideas in the clouds, and they ask Charlie Brown what he sees, and And he says, well, I was going to say I saw a horsey, but now I'm not so sure. What sometimes happens with groups is the most vocal members can set the tone and sometimes kind of quash the less aggressive or less outspoken members, and their ideas aren't really part of the group. And you really lose a lot when you don't hear from everyone. So we want to try to avoid one-way information transfer, or having one member set the goals and objectives of a project. And that can be done again by early on defining how you will communicate with each other. So just an overview of best practices. You want to start early because it does take longer to complete a collaborative project. You want to develop a shared vision of the desired end product. Now, you already know that you're writing a proposal, but that proposal is proposing some sort of research or educational project. And you need to understand what it is you're going to be doing, what activities you're going to be engaged in as a result of the funded research, and also what kind of information you're trying to collect from that research or those activities in order to contribute in some way to the larger body of knowledge. So what is it you're trying to contribute? If you all understand what you're going to do and what you're going to collect and then contribute to the larger body of knowledge, then everything you do can be aimed at those two shared goals. It's very important that everyone be able to see what you're working on as you're working on it. So a shared Google Drive, a Dropbox, and we'll talk about some other ways that you can work on this using technology, but creating some sort of repository of knowledge. So maybe you have been assigned to write the literature review for your project. You don't want to print out all the articles and you alone have physical copies of them. So make them available as PDFs in a shared drive. If you don't have access to that, then create an email chain where everyone gets a copy of them and they can comment on them and make suggestions or additions to them as you go along. You also need to have a formal communication plan. So if you're going to if you're going to use email, if you're going to meet regularly, if you're going to have telephone conferences, you need to set days and times for those meetings, and you need to know what it is you're trying to accomplish in those meetings. So are you just reporting on what you've done? Are you asking questions? Are you assigning tasks? When you're going to meet and talk and why you're going to meet and talk. Those are really important things to set early on. Now you can obviously change your goals and your schedule as your needs change, but that should be something that is thoughtfully done, not just something that you think, oh, I haven't heard from anyone in 3 weeks, I'm going to send out an email. You should have regularly scheduled emails or phone conferences or meetings, and know what it is you're trying to accomplish. So there are, if you are collaborating virtually, and sometimes you do this even when you're on the same campus, because it's hard to get to another building when you have classes and meetings with students and other responsibilities. So you may end up Skyping or using conference calling, and that's fine, but you need to make sure that some of that communication is synchronous. So you're not just emailing, you're not just posting something to a message board, but you're actually talking to one another in real time. You want to release your drafts early. So meeting often, I think I've repeated that several times. You also want to release your drafts early. This is really difficult, and it kind of goes back to the challenge of working as as individuals in academia. We don't like for people to see what we're doing until we're finished with it, until we're confident that it's the best that we can create. The problem with that in collaborative writing, obviously, is that you may go off in a direction that the group doesn't approve of, or your draft, even in rough form, may contribute to the vision of another writer in the group and may help them structure their part. And if they don't see it until late in the process, they may not be able to produce the best product that they can because you haven't shared your information. So part of this process of releasing early is understanding that everyone will release early. So as you're setting up your communication schedule and goals, you may also say, look, we're going to meet again in 2 weeks and everyone must bring what they've written, even if it's just an outline, so that we can share and give feedback. If releasing your drafts in the process of writing them becomes part of your communication and sharing, it gets easier. Everyone's doing it at the same time. So you aren't the only one sharing your rough draft. It's also a good idea, if you're going to meet face-to-face, to go ahead and share those drafts electronically via email or a shared drive, so that you don't spend your meeting time reading. If you hand out the physical draft and that's the first time anyone's seen it, and you have an hour for the meeting and they spend 40 minutes reading all of the drafts, you're not going to get a lot of feedback. So if you can at least make them available, say 24 hours in advance, people can skim through them and have some comments and suggestions earlier in the meeting. All right, so a last little bit on best practices. One recommendation that I have is that you might consider storyboarding. And what that means is creating some sort of visual representation of the structure of your proposal. Often students and faculty think in terms of an outline. So an outline done at the beginning of the writing process, and then an outline that you return to as you are moving through the writing process. The idea here is you are trying to get an overview of how the pieces that you plan to write or have written fit together. So for most of us, we come from a very visual culture, even though we're academics and we read and write all the time. For most of us, seeing how things fit together visually really can help us understand ways to strengthen the whole, to strengthen the connections between the pieces. So I do recommend early on creating some sort of outline or a visual representation. If someone in your group is good at sketching or drawing, you might even get artistic with it and think about how each section is supposed to connect to the next section. But if you can, at a glance, see what each segment of your proposal is supposed to do and how it leads to the next segment, how it is connected, and then can make sure in your writing that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing in the storyboard or the outline, that really can help you be more productive, making sure that what you're doing fits in, and that can also help make sure that your final product really is cohesive and makes sense to your later readers and reviewers. I also want to give a little bit of advice about writing and revising and working with others, getting reviewers and readers outside your group sometimes. First is the idea of revising versus proofreading. And I'm going to return to this in a moment when I get to the discussion of formatting. Proofreading is simply going through and polishing your writing product, or your written product rather, to make sure that all of those tiny little errors are corrected. So the punctuation, the spelling, spacing problems, any of those kinds of things. And that should be done as almost the absolute last thing that you do. You don't need to proofread a great deal as you go along. Now, obviously if you see something that distracts from your writing or your reading, you can correct that. But proofreading is focus on minor errors and should be done last. The reason it should be done last is that you should be revising as you go along. And revision is more about the structure and content, the message that you're trying to get across, and the ways that you connect the different parts of your proposal. How do you transition from one idea to the next? How do you repeat and reemphasize an idea or a theme in your proposal? And revising is really the heavy lifting of polishing a piece of writing. It's not about commas and capital letters. It's about making sure that everything fits together and it's clear, that there's clarity in your sentences, clarity in your sections. So focus on revising, and once you have a clear, cohesive proposal, then do the proofreading. As you are reading each other's segments, don't focus on the proofreading. Focus on giving positive feedback. Make sure that your critiques, even when you have something that you want to see changed, that you do it in a way that's constructive. Sometimes that involves asking questions instead of making comments. So if you read something and you don't understand what it means or what it's trying to accomplish, then ask a question of the writer. Say, what do you think that this paragraph or this segment of the proposal accomplishes? What do you think the reader, the reviewer, will come away with after reading this paragraph or after reading this section? And if the writer gives you an answer that you don't see in the piece of writing, in the section, then say, hey, can we work on making that a little bit clearer early on? So again, asking questions as you're critiquing sometimes can make your critiques more constructive. And then finally, formatting, going back to proofreading, formatting is something you do toward the end of the writing process. Some people like bullet points, some people don't. You may want certain headings in bold, or you may want extra spaces here or there, or you may have to change the formatting to squeeze in more information. Concentrate more on your message and flow in your early drafts and less on formatting. So if you have too much and you can't squeeze it into the page limit, 15 pages, that's something that you can look at the end. How can we reformat it to fit it together? If you have too little and you need to put in some white space to make it look like more, that's a formatting thing you do at the end. But really focus more on the message that you're trying to get across and less on formatting early on. The final note here that I want to make is about using technology. I've mentioned it repeatedly throughout the presentation. There are a number of technologies available to help you schedule meetings, and some of those are listed here. And there are also a lot of tools available for collaborative writing. On our campus we use Google, so we have Google Docs and Google Drive. Google Docs allows you to work together on a particular document, and you can set it so that it will track who's done what and who's made what changes. It will allow you to make comments. Google Drive allows you to share documents, to have a repository of information that everyone can access. And you can set that so that the owner of a particular file folder is the only one who can amend those documents, but anyone else who has access to it can at least see them. Dropbox is also used in a similar way, and in fact, I believe Dropbox now has some of the Google Docs-like options so that you can collaboratively edit if everyone has access to Dropbox. And then a final option is to create a wiki. If you have any very technologically savvy folks on your group, you can actually create your own wiki that will do a lot of these things. So I just listed a few of them there. The next PowerPoint will cover in detail the collaborative writing process, and hopefully you can use that to sort of plan out your proposal writing process with your group. So I look forward to talking to you about that in a few moments.